The wind howled across the Wyoming plains like a living thing, bending the tall dry grass and pressing against the small, weather-beaten cabin where Eleanor Hale stood alone, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, the other gripping the doorframe as she scanned the endless horizon. Because loneliness had taught her to listen for trouble long before it arrived, and today something felt wrong. Heavier than grief, heavier than hunger, heavier than the quiet fear that had lived in her chest ever since her husband Thomas was lowered into frozen ground 8 months earlier. She was only 22, widowed, pregnant, and forgotten by a world that rarely noticed women like her. But when she saw a dark shape collapse near the fence line, she didn't hesitate, didn't think about the rumors of bandits or the risk to her unborn child, because compassion had survived where hope had not, and she gathered her shawl and ran, skirts brushing against brittle grass until she found him. A man, barely conscious, bloodied, dust-covered, his breath shallow, his clothes finer than any ranch hands yet torn by violence, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet hers before closing again, and though fear screamed at her to turn back, she remembered Thomas's voice, remembered how kindness was the only wealth that never failed. So she dragged the stranger inch by inch back to her cabin, muscles screaming, heart pounding, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone still heard. Inside, she cleaned his wounds with shaking hands, noticing the scars of a life lived hard but not cruel, noticing how even in pain he carried himself with quiet dignity. And when he finally woke, his voice was hoarse, his words few, but gratitude shone brighter than the oil lamp between them, and Eleanor learned his name was Samuel Reed, though he spoke it like a man used to being known without introductions. Days passed, storms rolled in and out, and Eleanor fed him what little she had, shared stories of loss and endurance, of a husband who never came home from a cattle drive, of a child soon to be born into uncertainty, and Samuel listened not like a man being cared for, but like one being changed, his gaze lingering on the cabin walls, the handmade cradle, the courage of a woman who had every reason to close her door, but chose mercy instead. And when riders passed nearby, Samuel turned pale, fear flickering across his eyes, warning her to say nothing if anyone asked. And she didn't question him, because life had taught her that survival sometimes demanded silence. One night, feverish and shaking, he whispered apologies for a life he said had taken too much and given too little, and Eleanor, pressing a cool cloth to his brow, told him that people were not defined by what they owned or lost, but by what they chose when it mattered. And something in him broke open at those words, tears mixing with blood and sweat, because no one had spoken to him like that in years. If this story is already pulling at your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, stories of kindness, sacrifice, and unexpected destiny, are exactly what we bring to life here. And you won't want to miss what happens next, especially because Eleanor had no idea that the man sleeping under her roof was not just a stranger, not just wounded, but the unseen force behind nearly every ranch stretching across Wyoming. A truth that would soon test her faith, her courage, and her future in ways she could never imagine. When Samuel finally regained his strength, the man who emerged was quieter, humbler, and changed, spending mornings repairing Eleanor's broken fence, evenings carving small wooden animals for the unborn child, his hands once accustomed to command now learning the grace of service. And Eleanor, though wary of attachment, felt something unfamiliar stirring. Not romance, not yet, but trust. The kind that grows slowly in shared silence and honest labor. The truth came crashing down on a cold morning when riders arrived. Not bandits, but well-dressed men, removing their hats in reverence the moment they saw Samuel, calling him Mr. Reed with voices full of relief and fear, and Eleanor stood frozen as she learned the impossible. That Samuel Reed owned more land than most men could imagine. That his disappearance had sent shockwaves through Wyoming. That he was known as the Iron King of ranching, feared by competitors and respected by workers, a man rumored to value profit over people, and yet here he was standing barefoot on her porch, eyes filled with shame as he confessed that he had been running. From enemies, yes, but more from the emptiness of a life built on control rather than compassion. Eleanor expected him to leave, expected wealth to reclaim him as it always did. But instead he stayed, and when he finally departed weeks later, it was not to forget her, but to dismantle the empire he no longer recognized, canceling exploitative contracts, restoring stolen lands, and publicly crediting a young widow for saving not just his life but his soul. Months later, on the day Eleanor gave birth, a carriage arrived carrying doctors, supplies, and a letter promising education, security, and choice for her child, not charity, but gratitude. And Samuel never asked for her hand, never assumed her future, only offered opportunity with respect, proving that real power lies not in ownership, but in honor. Eleanor raised her child strong and unafraid, telling stories of a dying stranger who reminded the world that wealth means nothing without humanity. And years later, when Wyoming prospered under fairer hands, people whispered that it all began with a pregnant widow who opened her door instead of turning away. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that kindness can change destinies, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because every week we bring you powerful stories like this, stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one brave, heart-choosing compassion. When the world expects fear,